Okay, we'll go right into conduct of business. Our first item is 10A, adopt a resolution waiving the competitive bidding process and authorizing the city manager to execute a contract with a qualified electrical contractor for emergency replacement of underground electrical wiring for the Crestmoor neighborhood streetlight system in the amount not to exceed $500,000 and appropriating $500,000 from the Capital Reserve Fund.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. We would like to provide a brief update on the status of the streetlight outage since our last update to you at the special council meeting back in December 22nd. During the special meeting, staff presented both the temporary and permanent options to repair the streetlight system for consideration, which were previously discussed with the Surface Infrastructure Subcommittee. 4 temporary options were presented. The first option was the procurement of these floodlights. The city has already deployed 10 floodlights since December 4th and placed them at various intersections. Although they provide some lighting, these generators are noisy, and staff has received complaints from residents living adjacent to these floodlights. The other option included, secondary power from PG&E. An application was sent back in November to obtain secondary power to 29 streetlights. Although there's one viable option, PG&E design and construction schedule for completion of secondary power connections was between 3 to 5 months, and which was longer than what staff had anticipated. Staff has also looked at an option to provide LED solar panel lighting that can be attached to each streetlight fixture, and the city has already purchased 4 of these streetlights. As you can see on the slide here, it shows the location of the streetlights that are installed in the neighborhood, which is indicated in blue dots. The intent of these solar lights is to eliminate the use of the floodlights since they're noisy and cost the city about $28,000 per month for rental, staff time, and fuel. Although the solar lights provide some lighting, it does not have the same coverage as normal streetlights. With the cloudy weather and sufficient sunlight during the day, the solar lights do not charge and do not work at night. These solar panels are also recommended to be installed facing south to get the most optimal sunlight. Majority of the streetlights in the south of San Bruno Avenue area do not meet this requirement. Even though purchasing the solar lights is one viable alternative to get the streetlight on, the operation is strictly dependent on the weather and location of the streetlight. And the last temporary option that staff derived is to power each streetlight by connecting it directly with an extension cord. Since the streetlight have been converted to a 38 watts LED fixture, the electricity usage is very minimal, similar to a home table lamp. Currently, the city has a total of 16 residents that are participating in the program. And the locations where the temporary plug-in lighting are shown on the slide as red dots. And these residents have voluntarily participated and signed a liability waiver. For participating in the program, the city is providing an incentive of $50 per month for consideration of the liability waiver and cost of electricity. The city is very appreciative of all the residents that have participated in this program so they and their neighbors can have the streetlights on at night. And staff is continuing to reach out to neighbors by going door to door to discuss the program. We're hoping additional residents will come forward to assist the city and their neighbors until permanent repair is completed. For the permanent replacement of the system, staff provided 2 options. One is the replacement of the underground electrical wiring. Since PG&E replaced the RO transformer and the city already replaced the streetlight fixture to LED and the wiring inside the streetlight poles have been replaced, the only remaining component left to replace is the underground electrical wiring. The other permanent repair approach involves redesign and replacement of the entire system with a parallel electrical circuit. This alternative was not recommended because it requires extensive design and planning work through PG&E. The design and construction is estimated to take as long as 18 to 2 years to complete for that option. And staff received 2 proposals from highly qualified electrical contractors for the replacement of the underground wiring. One is from St. Francis Electric and the other from Cupertino Electric. St. Francis Electric cost estimate for the replacement of the wires is $428,000, whereas Cupertino Electric cost was $653,000. St. Francis Electric has recently assisted the city to troubleshoot the circuit and has knowledge of the issues, and they're well qualified to perform the work required to replace the underground electrical wires. The work will have a minimal impact to residents and consists of removing and replacing sidewalks at certain locations to install new utility boxes, removing and installing new electrical wiring throughout the neighborhood, and performing operation testing of the electrical circuit. Staff is currently recommending council to adopt a resolution to waive the competitive bidding process and authorize the city manager to execute a contract with the qualified electrical contractor for emergency replacement of the underground electrical wiring. The state law and city local ordinances address situations in which there might not be sufficient time to go through a competitive bidding process if emergency repair is needed. In this case, emergency exists because the streetlight outage has created a potential unsafe environment for both drivers and pedestrians, and the city has to use temporary lighting until the permanent lighting is restored. Per Public Contract Code and Municipal Code sections, the City Council may take any directly related and immediate action required by the emergency and procure necessary equipment, services, and supplies for those purposes without giving notice for bids to let contracts. An action by the City Council to declare emergency waiver of competitive bidding process and emergency bidding procedures requires a 4/5 votes of the City Council. Since this project is not included in the city's current CIP budget and no available funds are budgeted, staff is requesting an appropriation of $500,000 from the Capital Reserve Fund to cover the cost of the project. The project cost is anticipated to not exceed $500,000, which includes a typical construction contingency percentage of 15%. Should the City Council take action to waive the competitive bidding process and authorize the city manager to execute a contract with the contractor, the work is anticipated to begin the first week of February and completed by the end of May. This concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff? Ken?
Through the chair, I think it's great to, as being on the subcommittee, I'm fully understand what the option is as far as a permanent solution. I do want to ask, are we guaranteed that we replace this wiring, that everything would be resolved? My second question is about the temporary things. I mean, if we're starting in February and going 3 to 4 months, I'm concerned that even though we have 16 volunteers and then the prospect of some solar lights, people are still concerned about turning the floodlights off. And then I understand there are complaints. I am now concerned about safety throughout the night, and knowing that even though we do have 16 and possibly more, those lights are on all night. And where are the vulnerable areas? What can we do to make those areas safe, and not be a concern, especially when we're turning lights off, turning the floodlights off, I believe at 11 o'clock at night. So I'd like to hear what staff's opinion is about that and what we can possibly do over the next 3 or 4 months. Thank you.
For the first question, we discussed the replacement of the underground wires with St. Francis Electric during their troubleshooting efforts. And since the fixture has been replaced with LED as well as the wiring inside the streetlights pole, the only underground wiring that needs to be replaced is the underground cable. So we believe that once the underground cable is replaced, the streetlight should come back on. And as for the temporary measure, we are reaching out to additional residents, as I mentioned earlier, but some residents have resisted the city's attempt to reach out to them, since they've received letters in advance already regarding the city's wanting their assistance to plug in with the temporary power. But we can choose to keep the streetlights on, and that's one option. And it does cost the city about $28,000 a month for the streetlights. We are looking into exploring to install new solar lights, and there's 3 more that are being ordered and will be replaced within the circuit.
I guess my follow-up is: the staff feel, and possibly the police, do they feel that there are any areas that are more vulnerable than others?
So I'll give a preliminary answer and ask the chief to approach the podium in case you have additional questions. But exploring this issue with the police department, statistics that we have for the 11 weeks, and this is what we've done so far, is to evaluate carefully the 11 weeks prior to the onset of the outage and the subsequent 11-week duration to date of the outage. I was initially questioned the chief because the numbers were precisely the same. In other words, no change in the numbers of incidents. There continue to be incidents in the neighborhood, as there are all over the city and as there were prior to the streetlight outage, but there is no tangible evidence that either the police department has addressed with my office or that the crime statistics would demonstrate. This continues to be a relatively low incidence overall of criminal activity in the neighborhood, and no change that appears to have any relationship to the streetlight outage.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Just to echo the city manager's comments, the comparison between the 11-week period that the streetlights have been out and the previous 11 weeks are literally no change, which is very coincidental. As mentioned, there's a very low rate of incidents in this area already, and we went back and looked at the past 12 to 18 months, and if you pick out any 11-week period, during that period, it's consistent with the numbers that we're seeing now. So there's no data to suggest that there's any correlation or relationship between the streetlight outage and any impact on criminal activity.
And I guess if you could also discuss the enhanced efforts that the police department is providing during the time of the outage.
Sure. Since the outage, we've had scheduled passing checks throughout the neighborhood during the hours of darkness. Ironically, that's kind of increased our frequency of calls for service, I guess you'd say, in the area, based on self-initiated activity. When we see something suspicious, we identify it and check it out. And as mentioned before, that has not resulted in an increase in any type of criminal behavior. It's just that we're up there more often and on a regular basis and a little bit more conscious of what's going on. So we do notice vehicles or individuals that may look out of the ordinary, but to this point, there's been no significant spike or rise in any type of crime.
If I could just mention that I believe, we're going to make a decision on a permanent solution here, and then we're still looking at least 4 months of temporary situations. So continue to look for a way to illuminate the entire area, even on a temporary basis. And let's, and I am willing to do some outreach too. I want to know what those residents that, whether they don't want a temporary pole connection, they don't want the floodlights on, what do they want? What can we do that would, satisfy them? And if there's any other way to illuminate it short of a bonfire or whatever, let's keep diligent on that.
Yeah. So the primary issue that residents are.
I was going to say,
I'm
Chair,
sorry.
but no, go ahead.
The primary issue that residents are identifying to staff, and staff is literally going door to door. The director mentioned that we've sent a letter some weeks ago and are following that up with direct door-to-door conversations with individuals who live adjacent to a streetlight pole. The primary reason, I'm sure there's people who just should not be troubled by it, but the primary reason given is the city's request for signature on a liability waiver. And again, we've tried to come up with some alternatives that wouldn't subject the city to the risk of incidents or issues on private property that we don't control. But that's really the most compelling issue that is to our understanding discouraging participation. And there are, I think we need to be clear that we never intended that all 57 non-functioning streetlights could be attached to somebody's garage. There are some, somebody's electrical outlet. There are some areas where that's just not practical. But we're certainly hopeful of ultimately connecting more than the 16 that we have right now. We're continuing with that effort.
Okay. Any other questions?
Through the chair, on Mr. Ibarra's points too, even with the rental lights, is that something if a corner wants to have it maintained up until the next morning, that they have that option if the area is not inconvenienced by the noise or the light? I have the concern too that I think staff is working very hard every day, and I know that. Up to what you had said it would go over 12, so you were right. And so we're at that with the solar lights. I don't know if we were going to buy a couple more solar lights. Of course, more outreach. If there's something that we can do to help encourage or give demonstration that your neighbor down here has done it and this has been something maybe you want to speak to them. But I'm wondering, it is dark. Ken and I know we've been up there periodically. And I just want to know that, do we have to turn them off? If the area is willing to say, keep them on, are we precluded from having them go until daybreak so that we can maintain what people might perceive as a safe and better environment?
So there's two issues here, and one is, as we presented to the subcommittee and then also to the full city council on December 22nd, is the ongoing cost of the floodlights. Those are at 10 flood lamps operated for approximately 6 hours per night. The cost, it was calculated at $28,000 a month. So that becomes a policy issue. We had hoped to discontinue those lights because of the cost, but we can certainly put them in other locations and continue the rental and operational costs of those lights. We can run them all night. Certainly there'll be fuel, additional fuel, so I would expect that to be more than $28,000. We have received complaints from some neighbors adjacent. Other neighbors like them. So running them, as you suggest, all night in locations where we don't receive a complaint about the noise is something we can do. It's an issue of, in primary at this point, whether that's what your direction is.
Anything else? Okay.
I'd like to give the direction to regarding 10 floodlights, if we could, and possibly draft a survey to those 10, to residents adjacent to those 10 floodlights to say, would you like them on all night, so that we can sort of get a feel for who is complaining, whether there's some concern that want them on longer. I'd like us to be pretty clear on how the neighbors directly adjacent to those floodlights feel.
Yeah, so let me make a suggestion here. So staff has just informed me that we only have, as the map shows, 4 floodlights currently deployed in the neighborhood. And we've actually returned 5 of them that we had previously rented, which I suppose we could rent them again.
Yes.
What I'd like to suggest is that staff, as part of their, and I think you get a good depiction on this picture here, you can actually see what areas might be lit better than others. And we had originally deployed the 10 flood lamps at street intersection locations. We moved them around a little bit, but what I would suggest is that staff make an evaluation of what locations from a traffic and pedestrian circulation perspective might be most benefited if we were to deploy the flood lamps, as many as the 10 that we had, where those might go, because we might have direct connections now at some of the intersection locations. So we might want to be able to move them around a little bit, talk to the neighbors. If your interest is that we would continue as many as 10 of them as we had, based on where they are best and most best utilized and most welcome, we can certainly do that.
Yeah. And I believe, I mean, it looks like it's changing, and I can see where you have the floodlights, and I'd be happy to, go out there along with my colleague on the subcommittee and, and.
Join us
and-
door to door.
Well, it's door to
Absolutely.
door, or
Yeah.
see, or make that assessment, yeah, it's dark here.
Yep.
We need to do something here.
Yep.
Or, no, this seems to be okay. I don't want people to think that we're not engaged in, in looking out for the safety in every area of that afflicted area.
Sure, we're happy to work.
And
with
and
you
I
on
would
that.
like the city manager's suggestion of assessing, evaluating. Now that we have 5 that are gone, maybe we need to bring them back. I understand that the cost, like you said, about $28,000 for all of them to be operated, but I don't want to shortchange it, and I think this is something that is important to the community, the neighborhood, and I think if it means a little bit more money to get back to where we were for safety and security, that's what we should do.
Okay, any action on the item?
I'd like to adopt a resolution to waive the competitive bidding process and authorize the city manager to execute the contract.
Councilmember Ibarra.
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Medina.
Aye.
Mayor Ruane.
Aye.